Global finance is being reshaped, and it is powered by digital infrastructure that never sleeps. On Interconnected, a new podcast by Equinix that explores the hidden infrastructure behind our connected future, they lay out the trends that make tomorrow's banking system possible. Project Liberty Institute CEO Sheila Warren, Wormhole Foundation co-founder Dan Reeser, and Gauntlet CTO and co-founder Ri Chiang explore the ongoing progress of decentralized finance. Listen on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We're coming to you live from our massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. For this week's show, we dig into cybersecurity again. Now, this is a topic we haven't done a ton of shows on in the past, but there's a method to my madness, and let me explain. With the increasing interest in AI, I've been fascinated by its practical applications, and we often hear about mixed results when it comes to AI adoption, and I believe that's going to be normal until the most prominent use cases bubble up to the top and become mainstream. Now, one area I've seen a pretty dramatic shift in is security. For all the bad actors out there, AI is really like steroids for the script kiddies, and it's only natural that AI can and should be utilized on both sides to help level the playing field. AI has increased the amount of attacks and traffic, and that contributes to more noise and more alerts to filter out and to get to the signal behind the noise. And that is what today's episode is all about. And all of that is coming up right after this break.
Today's show is brought to you by TestCube. Testing applications in Kubernetes doesn't have to be complicated. TestCube is your go-to platform for cloud-native continuous testing. With TestCube, you can orchestrate, scale, and automate tests effortlessly right within Kubernetes, catching issues early and deploying with confidence. Try it out today and see why engineering teams trust TestCube to keep their testing simple and scalable. Your tests, your tools, your infrastructure finally together. Check it out at testcube.io/cloudcast.
And we're back. And this week we have another super interesting guest. And it's something actually that we've dug into here and there on the show in the past. And this concept of certainly cybersecurity, but has been really the theme for, most of this year. We've really been talking a lot about different emerging technologies and how AI potentially impacts that. And we're going to be really focusing on this intersection between cybersecurity and AI today. And for that, we have Monzy Merza, co-founder and CEO at Crogl. So first of all, welcome to the show, Monzy. How are you?
Great to have you here, and thank you so much for having me. I'm doing really well.
Absolutely. So let's start. Give everyone a brief introduction and tell us about your journey, because I think you've got this really unique journey of kind of government research and then Splunk and then Databricks and then kind of founding your own thing as well. So tell everyone a little bit about that, please.
I started my life of work. If we go way back, I started my programming journey with computers in BASIC when I was probably in 4th or 5th grade. And fast forward to starting a career, I spent about a dozen years in the nuclear weapons complex. And from there, I went to Splunk. I was there for about a decade, got an amazing opportunity to see Splunk grow and get connected with the community and the practitioners around the world. And then I went and joined Databricks at a very critical time in their journey and created the cybersecurity go-to-market function there, and really got to learn about big data and AI and how things were happening. And then I realized that, there was an opportunity to serve the cybersecurity company in a new way. And the big thing that I realized was data was everywhere. Security analysts need to utilize all of that data, and they were oftentimes impeded by the requirements of the different tools they needed to use, whether they were data lakes or point solutions and so on. So I thought it would be cool to start a company to serve that security community in a very different way. So instead of starting a company, I went and joined the cybersecurity team at one of the global banks. And I knew the security leadership there, and they joked with me and they said, "Great, you're an executive at Databricks. Come be an executive over here. How big of a team do you want?" And I said, no, I don't want a team. I want to work on tickets. I really want to feel the pain of what security analysts do on a day-to-day. So I really got an opportunity to, and I shared with them that my goal was to create a startup. And so I did the job, rolled up my sleeves, really felt the day-to-day rigor that security practitioners experience every single day. And then about a year later from there, started Crogl with the mantra that, what if we create a company which would make every security analyst to be, or enable every security analyst to be as effective as the entire team? That's a ridiculous proposition. But that was our North Star. And we started Crogl 2.5 years ago with that mindset.
I love that. I love that. So Monzy, let me ask you this, because I really think, like, when I start to think about like cybersecurity and AI, I think of certainly all the bad things we're seeing, like all the big headlines in the news, right? Of like almost like cybersecurity and AI scams, almost like at times being even bigger than ransomware at times, and certainly easier. And I've used the, jokingly used the term on the show many times, like it's almost like, Script Kiddie's AI kind of thing of like, hey, what are all these ways to go get all these tools and go figure out all these things? And it's really accelerated everything that's kind of going on in security. So give us your take of like what's driving this shift with both cybersecurity and AI, and why should organizations really be paying more attention, quite frankly, to this intersection?
I think the base principle for this is that the business users in any number of organizations are starting to use AI capability to get more work done. And we're all beneficiaries of that. As a consequence, the developers in any number of organizations, whether internal or product builders, are also utilizing AI to serve those business users and to serve those communities with products. So there's a lot of AI use. And so as a consequence, there is the adversary threat actors that are also starting to use AI to capture the opportunity that they have or exploit the opportunity that they have from this new footprint. So that's kind of I think the base foundation of why this emergence is happening. And of course, this doesn't mean that the old or older techniques, whether they're related to phishing, whether they're related to misconfigurations of cloud instances, all of those things are there too. So this is an additive. This is not a versus kind of a thing. And what we're seeing from a number of different publications and seeing and talking to customers is there's an increase of a roughly 28 to 30% number of alerts year over year that an organization is receiving and that they have to work on. And the number of security personnel that they have to work on those alerts is more or less flat. So that's kind of the base principle here to say, you have to look at more stuff with the same number of people in a much more complex environment. And so there is a need for the security community to have capabilities using AI or otherwise to help them maintain their security postures and serve their businesses.
I love that. Thank you very much. Now, I'll kind of take that one step further then. So you've described Crogl as an Iron Man suit for security analysts at times, and that's a super compelling and super visual, analogy and metaphor. And so, like, but can you break down what you mean by that, and like how your approach differs from just the traditional, hey, let's reduce the alerts, or like, let's figure out, basically needles and haystacks kinds of things. And so tell everyone a little bit about this metaphor and how you've kind of thinking about this differently, please.
The core of this is that the security practitioner, the analyst, many listeners on this podcast, they are the real heroes. You all know what the work is. You know your environment. You know what's important. You know what the work is. The volume of work that you have and the difficulty that you all have is increasing. And so I like to use this Iron Man analogy, is that Crogl is in service. Crogl being the suit is in service of that community, of that analyst, because it is able to eliminate certain things that you kind of constantly have to deal with. I'll give you a concrete example. Like one of the challenges that I heard from CISOs and even security practitioners around security workforce problems. Like everybody says, oh, there's not enough people. Well, it's not that there's not enough people. It's that there are not enough unicorns. Because this is the only industry that expects somebody to understand an email header, understands how you're going to write a query in a very particular query language, whether it's SQL or KQL or SPL or whatever that is, and expect you to understand what PCI means all at the same time. So we have this compounding effect of competency requirements, and those people simply don't exist. And the space is very, very complex. So the idea behind using that analogy for the Iron Man suit and what Crogl does is our customers are using it to investigate events without the security analyst having to memorize the schema across their environments and all the different tools. Security analysts know what to do, but they're often impeded by the physics of the tool that they need to really, really understand before they can execute their task. You need to know, if you're using a data lake, well, what is the query? But you also need to know, well, what is the schema? And really what you want to know is, well, how many emails did Bob get last week? So that's why I like to use this analogy of an Iron Man suit in service of the security community, is that domain expert is the security user, security practitioner, and it's Crogl's job to ensure that they can exercise their intuition and their domain expertise as quickly as possible. And this querying mechanism being one example of that.
I like that. And the other thing I would add to it as well is just this concept of, it's always been around. I think anybody in cybersecurity and especially CISOs, like, they have the hardest job in the world because you have to be perfect. It's this whole concept of, the hackers only have to get right once.
Yeah.
And I think that anything you can do to bolster that and reduce those chances of something getting through is certainly valuable and certainly worth a look at in the ROI behind it. Now let's kind of move on a little bit of, like, there's been talk about, like, okay, what you're going to call a knowledge engine, right? And what we might think of as, like, AI for an enterprise SOC, right? And you're using kind of like I'll use the term like compound AI systems, like where it's LLMs. It might be smaller models. There's a little bit of knowledge graphs thrown in. Like, it's more than just a bolt on of an LLM. And I feel like, if nothing else, a lot of folks in our industry, we went through, when public cloud was coming to be, we went through cloud washing. And I feel like we're going through AI washing. And so tell everyone a little bit about both this architectural decision and like why it matters to build, and what are the layers, and how is it important, and how is it different from a bolt-on?
The base of this is a mindset that says we have to live in a world where the number of alerts that security teams want to investigate is going to increase by a lot. And the number of things that security teams want to get curious about, or you can call them threat hunts, or things that are sort of human-led intuition exercises, are also going to increase. And then the data that is required is going to be proliferated and fragmented across lots and lots of footprints, including data lakes, point solutions, documents, any number of things. And so that's the base of all of this. So then we say, okay, if that is the world we want to live in, then what is the tooling required to do that? So the first thing you sort of very quickly come to the conclusion of is that we have a pretty significant requirement to understand data schemas and understand what is really out there in any given enterprise so that it can be utilized for security use cases. So that is one piece of what we do, is that we understand and build a knowledge graph of what's in the enterprise without moving the data, but just understanding what that is. And if you look at it from a practitioner's perspective, that's, as practitioners, that's what we all do. tend to start memorizing, well, email data is over here and endpoint data is over there, or system information and debug information is over there. So we build a knowledge graph on the enterprise in our head. So that's where that knowledge graph piece comes into place. You have to really understand what that is. So as a compound AI system, that's a critical component. And of course, there's a second piece of this, is that you need the ability to do fact retrievals. So when we write a query to look for how many emails did Bob get, that's really what we're doing, right? We're writing a query to retrieve specific information. That is not a generative problem. It's a fact retrieval problem. So you cannot divine that answer. You need to know exactly what happened. So it's not a problem for an LLM. Now, where the LLM fits into this equation is if there is an answer, the LLM is good for summarization of the answer. And so we're using these different components, whether they're knowledge graphs, whether they are even just traditional relational databases, or LLMs are building smaller models in concert using what we used to call this an orchestration system. Well, now everybody calls it an agentic system. And using those agents to communicate between all these, and that's how the compound AI system comes into play. Because an LLM by itself is insufficient because it doesn't know the environment. So anybody's LLM that gets trained outside of your environment has no knowledge of your environment. But it is LLMs in general can be really good at summarization, at generation of text, at entity extraction. And so we utilize them for what they're good at and not over-index on that capability.
Yeah, and you actually hit on probably the key point of where I was going to go next. Of, it seems like you've got the Gen AI and the Gen AI use cases of like, hey, it's great at generating text, it's great at summarization, it's going to be great at some of these things. And then you have this agentic AI trend of like, okay, have the agents go off and do things and kind of come back. And so that's where I'll kind of go with my next area here of like, I feel like, I've seen numbers where it's like, okay, upwards of 5,000 alerts a day. And maybe a team at its best can investigate 25 to 50 of them. I mean, it's just a needle in a haystack kind of thing. And so the industry trend, and not just in cybersecurity, but just anything where it's, big time log analysis or real time tracing, you have this concept of like, I need to filter out as much as I possibly can. But in talking to you and kind of researching about this, like, it's almost like this opposite philosophy of every alert should be analyzed. And this is this the idea of, okay, let's take advantage of Gen AI and agentic AI and flip it on its head, because it seems very counterintuitive to historically what the market has been doing? Or is this like, okay, now this autonomous investigation approach, like it's actually going to work in practice, and it's potentially the future of the industry?
There is, within bounds, there should be some filtering, right? Otherwise, if you don't filter, you're back all the way down to log and traces again, right? So you have to do something within bounds. However, historically, the mantra has been, you've got to filter, you got to reduce the number of alerts, so you're only alerting what you really need to pay attention to, right? And so that's been the mantra. And so people spend a lot of time fine-tuning their alerts, and a lot of detection engineers spend a lot of time and energy to ensure that the investigators and responders are not burning cycles. But when you look at a world where things are emerging, like the utilization of AI in this space, where all of us are learning, we don't really know quite not right now what is exactly the right thing to pay attention to and not exactly the right thing to pay attention to. And so in that space, I think it would be unwise to filter too early. And similarly with some of the alerts that happen in cloud environments or even on-prem environments, sometimes it is unwise to filter too early. And we've had to do that given the physics of what you just described. There's only so many alerts an analyst can work on. And I think what the analyst community and this security practitioner community, myself included, when I went back and being on the bench and working on tickets, what I realized was it's not so much that we're asking for fewer alerts. What we're asking for is we want to work on things that matter. And we want to automate things for which we have high confidence. And so those are the bounding boxes. So as a consequence, now we have this opportunity with an AI system, and more broadly a compound AI system that can expose the analyst to things that really matter, that the analyst can take and go forward with and do the kinds of things that the machine can do. So maybe the analyst community can still only work on 25 alerts, but now they're working on 25 that really, really matter. And they're actually providing feedback into the into the improved security posture of the organization. And the other extreme of this is alerts are a side effect of a sensor making some observation, whether it's an analytic or a detection query that a human wrote, or whether that's a sensor like an IDS or EDR or email detection system, whatever it is, some sensor making a determination. So there's something to that needs to be investigated. And I've seen security analysts close literally hundreds of tickets in one swing without analyzing any of them because they're so desensitized, because they know that this is just going to be a waste of time. They're not lazy. They're just trying to they're just too much. And I like to use the analogy I learned from one of my friends. He said, I went to the doctor because I had a headache. And the doctors, ran a bunch of tests. They called me a week later and they said, congratulations, you don't have a tumor in your brain. And I said, great, thank you for the news, but I still have the headache. And so we've been conditioned to think in these terms of false positives and so on and so forth as security practitioners. But what we've always really wanted is we want to solve the problem. And so we have now the opportunity, if we take the right approach, to solve the problem, and analyzing more alerts is a pathway to do that, as long as you can automatically investigate them and surface the right things to the analyst with transparency. And I think that's really the key point. Transparency and consistency in analysis is what's going to make it better for an AI system in the security operations space.
I like that. And I'll also add kind of maybe a follow-on to that. So we talked about, agentic AI, and it's so interesting because I feel like no one quite knows how to use agentic AI yet. And what I mean by that phrase is you get everything from folks going, oh, agentic AI, it does everything for me. And it is amazing. And it's so great. And, almost like fully autonomous. But at the same time, I mean, especially like in my personal observation, it's like having junior level interns at best. Like you don't trust it. Whatever you do, don't trust it. Don't let it do everything. Don't let it take actions without humans in the loop, kind of thing, right? And so, part of me says, hey, wouldn't it be awesome if we had this fully autonomous SOC going forward? And part of me says, oh man, that's just a nightmare and that's never going to happen. And so tell me your thoughts on both current state and future state. Do you think we would ever get there? And do you think we should ever get there?
There is a spectrum here there are certain things that we can clearly see that are very time consuming, that we have a good understanding of. And by we, I mean, as security practitioners, we have a good understanding of those processes and those techniques, but we're still impeded by the tools, and the tools slow us down to accelerate those things. So there is a category of those things. As an example, there's a lot of contextualization use cases. You get an alert for phishing, and putting that into a sandbox, or knowing that attachment has been floating around the rest of the company and it's okay, or that you have a partner that sends you that email or PDFs regularly, so and sends you invoices, and so you're kind of building a little. Yeah, could it be bad? Yes, but you're building a little bit of context, and we constantly have to go figure this out. Whose machine is this, and is this machine supposed to be connecting from Europe right now into a North American data center? Right, there's a lot of this kind of context building kind of use cases, and oftentimes we have to dredge that information through and do that manually. Those kinds of tasks, I believe they can certainly be fully automated. And these are not SOAR style tasks. They are very much investigative data retrieval kinds of tasks that require a little bit of reasoning and sequencing of putting things together. So I think those tasks could certainly be fully automated. Some people bucketize those as like a tier 1 or tier 2 kind of a task. There's lots of different numbers floating around, but I don't think there's much agreement on what the tiering really means. But there are some tasks like that. There is another body of tasks that I believe can also be automated to a large degree, where if you have a certain level of paranoia and you say, when I get an alert, I want to investigate it across a certain number of phases of the kill chain. We understand what the kill chain is. We understand that, for initial access, you should be looking for USB disk insertions or for email attachments or for file downloads or something like that. And so that action is well understood. We should just be able to go and execute those actions, and we should be able to chain and come up with some sense of, well, did this particular infection have a blast radius? That is well understood. And so that can be done. Now, the thing that I believe that for the foreseeable future is not going to be fully automated is where the human has to be the decision maker and say, okay, I've seen the context, and as a consequence, I'm going to make a decision. I'm going to escalate this alert, or I'm going to remove that attachment from the mailbox, or I'm going to call law enforcement because I believe there's something really bad going on. In order to do that, you need a lot of context, you need a lot of confidence, and ultimately the human should be at the wheel of that decision. We've all seen many Star Trek episodes where the data says one thing and Captain Picard wants to go the other. And in terms, he ends up being right most of the time, and because he has some broader sense of what's happening, and that's the human practitioner. So I don't see the human practitioner going away anywhere anytime soon, because there is a business decision making and business risk reduction problem here. This is not necessarily an AI and simply an automation problem. And another way to think about it is it's a data, process, and governance problem. So when you look at it from that lens, then the human will always be required to be in the loop and should be in the loop, because up until the foreseeable future, we don't estimate suing an AI system or holding an AI system responsible for actions. Humans are responsible for actions and ramifications. So that's how I see it. And the system and then it goes all the way full circle back to the Iron Man suit, right? The system is in service of the person. And that's how it needs to be approached.
I like that. Thank you. And one final question I was just thinking of while you were talking about that. In AI, we're familiar with this concept of, okay, if you're going to pull in a big model, like just say it's a frontier LLM, you're probably not going to fine tune it. I mean, you might get something off Hugging Face and you might fine tune it or train it yourself, but if you need to give it your data, a lot of times it's like, hey, I'm going to set up a RAG system, or I might do MCP and do some external lookups that way. How do you do that in the context of enterprise security? And what I mean by that is, how much of it is you have to tune it to that specific enterprise and that organization, and how much of it is just keeping on top of the latest threats that are out there as well. Like, so I almost see like twofold ways that you need to constantly stay up to date and, be able to pivot very, very quickly.
This is the reason why we anchor, to your question, why we anchor in the concept of data, process, and governance as the key pillar for enterprise usage of AI in the SOC. And so from our point of view, we use large language models. I mean, first, from Crogl's perspective, Crogl can run in the cloud. Crogl can run in air-gapped environments, completely disconnected from the internet. We have customer right now that's doing that. And so we built the system in that way, so that's a governance piece that is completely, fully in control of the customer. And so that piece is very important. So when you build a system like that, the question becomes, well, how are you going to learn and service that customer? So there is an LLM that we ship with, but because of this concept of the knowledge graph, we are building the semantic layer for all of the data that the customer has, so that we know where the data lives. So we're not, quote unquote, running a learning model on top of it to really just try to understand and build an LLM as a consequence. But we're building a knowledge graph so we know what kind of data sits where. It's called source IP in your Splunk instance. It's called SRC underscore IIP in an S3 bucket. It's called something else in log analytics. It's called hot dog and sashimi, somewhere else. So we map all of that information together. So that mapping is critical, because when you want to know how many emails Bob got, you need to know where all those pieces are, and the field labels shouldn't matter. So that's one piece that's really, really important to actually build. And we don't believe there's a shortcut for that. So we invested a lot of energy in a capability, and we have a patent for this, to learn the semantic knowledge of a given enterprise. So that's a very important element. The second piece of that is, yes, you can use a RAG, and that helps promote things faster because you want to understand what's going on. But the core point of that is there is this process component. Every organization has a slightly different process in the way they handle things. And the question is, well, how does one learn that process? Well, that process comes from the work of the security analysts themselves. There's historical work that people have done, and there's work that they will continue to do. And if you have a system that is a learning system that can see what the analysts are doing and then create a process from that. And the process should be deterministic to some degree, but it should be adaptive so that it can evolve as practice changes. And so that's the other area that we invest a lot of energy in, so that Crogl is working according to a process. So far we covered governance, we covered data, we covered process, right? So those are the key pillars. Now the tooling is on top of that. The tooling is, okay, I need agents to do work in a certain way. I need a large language model. I need a smaller model that can understand the entities that exist in this environment. And I need a very, very strict sort of relational graph to understand the semantic data that's there. And so those are just tools that we would then use to implement these base requirements for the organization. And that's why we say, this is not just simply a throw a high-powered LLM at the problem. You need these other capabilities, because everybody on the podcast knows this, is that the data itself changes. There's new data, there's the data formats change. It happens with quite a high degree of volatility. A new threat comes in, you have to learn, there's a CISA advisory that comes out. So you can't say, well, I have to write a new playbook. That takes too long. So for Crogl customers, Crogl can learn from that advisory very quickly and generate a process from that advisory and express that process back onto the data set. And then the user can see, okay, well, this is what Crogl is going to do about this. So I always just fall back to data, process, and governance, and then we can keep adding layers of tools on top of it. But if we skip that piece, then we're all going to be and we are generally unsatisfied with SIMs and SOARs and UBAs. And those are the reasons, because I try to skip the foundational problems.
Yeah. I completely see how that kind of comes full circle in the end there. So that's awesome. Thank you for that. And actually, I think that's a great place for us to stop today as well. So Monzy, for those out there interested, what's the best way to get started?
The best way to do it is go to Crogl.com and please reach out to us. You can reach out to me directly at monzy@Crogl.com, or you can reach out to our sales email at sales@Crogl.com. And what we like to do is, when we work with our customers, is we like to do use case design workshops to really try to understand what they care about. Going back to this, that there really is no one size fits all solution to this situation. So we like to learn what's important to you, and then we can do a deployment and then continue our partnership working with our customers. We're also I also invite everybody to go to Crogl.com/events. We're constantly traveling. We're out in the community. We have a couple trips coming up to Colorado and New York. We're going to be in DC in the upcoming month, in the DC area in the upcoming month as well. So if you're there, please come see us.
Love it. Fantastic. So Monzy, thank you very much for your time. And for everyone out there listening, thank you very much for your time today. If you enjoy the podcast, Please, if possible, if wherever you get your podcast, if you can leave a review, we'd love for you to leave us a review, and always send us feedback as well. show@thecloudcast.net. We're always looking for feedback, guest ideas, and topic ideas as well. For that, I'm going to wrap it up this week, and thank you everyone for listening, and we will talk to everyone next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.